All right, welcome back to another live. I'm your host, Joseph Lewin, and most of us want to have more efficiency in our business. We want to we want to make the most use of our time, and even though it can be great to hire people, you also don't want to always be hiring people as you scale something new. You're trying to figure something out, and end up having to let people go. That's a terrible situation. So. I'm excited to dive into creating efficiency in our business through automation, workflows, all that kind of stuff. But first, we're all actually going to talk about the nature of work and some of the reasons why people like entrepreneurship. So excited to have my guest Jay Smith today, and we're going to be diving into these things. So welcome, Jay.
Thank you. Thanks, Joseph. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So you spent a good portion of your career in corporate environments and more structure, and then you've transitioned over into consulting and more on the entrepreneurship side. And so I'm just kind of curious what led you to lean more into the consulting side of things.
So I've been with many different companies, mostly in the transportation, logistics, manufacturing sectors. And after 5 or 6 years, I would get itchy feet, or the company would start getting itchy feet because I like breaking things and just calling people in other departments because it's touching processes that we had issues with. And what I just kind of naturally came to over 20 years is, a machine works because every little piece and component has its role. And you can't have a cog on one end of the machine just decide it's going to start working on another end of the machine. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
So companies are kind of reluctant to have people work outside their roles. And what I've found as a consultant is psychologically, when they identify they have a challenge big enough to find outside help, they are now committed to listening to that person. Whereas when you're inside, you're more, and you also have your day-to-day and your management responsibilities. So you don't really have the capacity for creative and outlets and breaking things apart.
Yeah, no, I mean that I totally feel you on that. I mostly work for smaller businesses, and so you tend to get it's good and bad when you're working for a small business because you do get to work across the business a lot of times, but also you kind of have to work across the business a lot of times. So
Yes.
if you don't, then you're not going to last there very long. But then you do run into the same challenge of I found a lot of times when a CEO hires you in, they have put a certain frame around you. And
Yeah.
unless you're working for a really excellent boss, which I have a few times, but unless you're working for somebody who really understands the value that people bring to their team, they've already kind of pigeonholed you into, oh, you do this thing over here. And once they framed you that way, it can be very difficult, if not impossible. Whereas to your point, when you can come in on the consulting side, whether it's an individual or you're working at a smaller agency or something like that, you tend to your point, have a lot more sway in actually changing things,
Sure.
and bringing alignment around their teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And just buy-in is natural. Whereas, when you're inside the machine, you're dealing with inner politics. You've got your responsibilities. If it's easy to poke at you and say, why are you worried about this process when you're not 100% on all of your metrics or whatever?
Right. Well, yeah, and then the challenge with that is your metrics are affected by other people. And so then
Hmm.
if you're going, hey, look, this piece over here is broken, and of course my metrics are going to be terrible because let's just use marketing and sales as an example because that's been the space I've played in primarily. It's like, okay, as a marketing person, I can be bringing in exactly the right people, and the salesperson can just go, nah, that's not a good quality lead. And it's like, bro, we just spent like so much money and time and energy to get that lead, and you didn't even
Yeah.
try. You didn't even look at them, right? Or on the sales side, it could be the opposite where marketing is generating leads and they haven't taken time to understand uh, what's actually going on, and so then they could be sending a bunch of junk leads to the sales team that are not going to really do anything for you, and
Yeah.
they don't want to waste their time with somebody they know is junk, right? So then if you don't have that communication between marketing and sales and there's not alignment around, well, who are we actually going after? Are they the right fit? Are we generating them? And then when we do, are we following up with them? Are we making sure to have value? Then yeah, you end up being held, your success ends up being held back by somebody else on the team.
Yeah. And that, not to dive directly into the benefits of automation, but you're speaking exactly to the kind of use case where when you're able to free up capacity, then you can start having those inter-office meetings and those interdepartmental team meetings to find those inefficiencies or things that could be made better. And going back to my experience with Fortune 500 companies, this old notion that we find efficiency, therefore we extract shareholder value, which I get it, that's their legal requirement. It doesn't work, and it's working less and less every year. And that's why, the vast majority of the Fortune 500 60 years ago doesn't exist on the Fortune 500 anymore, because you can only efficiency your way into a commodity, essentially.
Yeah, I like that phrase. That's a good way to look at it. Okay, so you were saying, and I want to dive in more onto the automation side and really dig into that. But
Sure.
in our conversation leading into this, you were saying you had pretty different perspective on work and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I'd love to just kind of give you a chance to share your point of view.
Yeah. I firmly believe that every organization is, and whether they say it or not, and they don't recognize it in most cases, your people really are your only differentiation. Your teams, and if you've worked in a team, if you have one rock star hire, it's worth 5 bad hires. And when one good person leaves, it's extremely painful for that team and for that manager. And at a corporate level, that's not recognized. And very rarely do I come across organizations who actually have a number and a pulse on how much their turnover costs them. But they accept 40 to 70% turnover, which is insanity. Outside of the creativity and the knowledge and the what the people know who've been with your business for a long time, you don't have anything special. You can't, you're not turning lead into gold. Like, you have a process, you have some IP, but the more you let people leave, your IP goes to wherever they go.
Absolutely.
Regardless of what you made them sign, their knowledge goes with them. So personally, I think each and everything you do within your organization should be geared towards making things better for your people. That's kind of antithesis of an automation engineer is what I do, right? But I think that freeing up capacity so those people can be more creative and happy with what they're doing. Like, I challenge any CEO to show me an administrative process that couldn't be done in 4 days for the same pay, and they'll save even more money.
Yeah, absolutely. And
9 to 5 is unnecessary.
What does that enable you to do? It enables you to pay your people more to retain them, and that's a huge issue. Like, because going back to where I was saying, I've worked for a few bosses who are awesome. They typically have seen value that I'm bringing, and they are usually paying me significantly better than other people were to begin with. But then they also open up opportunities when they can't pay me for me to grow and really advance my career. And most of them also recognize, hey, you're not going to be here forever. And I get that. So I also want to help you develop in the skills that you need to progress in your career, so that when you're here, we're getting the most value, but when you leave, we're setting you up for success. And that makes me so much more likely to continue bringing value to that business after I leave by recommending people go work there, or recommending clients or whatever. Whereas if they are pushing me to the side and having me do a bunch of admin tasks that totally drain me, where I'm not really able to live up to my potential. And then, to your point, the more that I'm using AI or automations or things like that, it's almost exclusively so that I can do the things that I'm actually uniquely good at doing, and do a lot less of the things that keep me from doing what I'm actually uniquely good at. The things that are very hard to automate, which usually relate to human connection, human relationships, building rapport with people, being able to listen for the things and ask the right questions to uncover what's actually going on in a situation. And those are the things that our workflows and automation don't typically catch. They're not typically able to find that hidden thing somebody's not willing to say out loud until you ask the right question, right? So I totally agree with you.
Yeah, and it's somewhat radical as a consultant, because the expectation is, and that's a barrier to get over when I come in the door, because I want to talk to every single team member that's affected by this process. I want to get their insights, their expertise. The 25-year employees who I've always done it this way, that's exactly who I want to talk to. Because we're not taking the time. And, Senior leaders shuffle in and out every 6 to 7 years. Statistically, it's just how it happens unless they own the company. When they come in, they don't inventory the skills and the abilities of all the people that work for them. They don't do a review of everybody's CV and resume or find out what opportunities there are within their own organization to just mix things up and make them so much more awesome. And, their workforce gets jaded over time because no one's exploring what they're really capable of.
Yeah. I mean, I've been there multiple times where I'm like, guys, there's these other things we could be doing that are going to work way better. I have already built some of the skills to do it, and I'm willing to build the rest of the skills. I just need permission to do it. And like even been in a situation where I'm like, I'm not even asking that you remove responsibilities. I'm just asking that you guys don't like actually let me do this. And then it'll be like, oh, maybe whatever. So then I go do it on my own. I learn the skill, and multiple times I've gotten hired for much better jobs to do exactly what I was trying to do for them for significantly less. And if they would have just let me do it, I probably would have stayed for about the same pay or whatever, right? But pay is one piece of it that is actually important, because if you have a rock star in your team, you need to make sure that you're compensating them equal to what they would get somewhere else. Otherwise, they're going to leave, and then you're going to pay more to hire and train and upskill somebody to take over that role, and then you're losing all of the institutional knowledge and everything with that person. So it's costing you a crazy amount of money. Why not just pay them a little bit of that? But then also,
absolutely,
on the flip side of that, you've also got it's not only about pay. Like, pay is really important, but like making sure that people are being heard and appreciated, that when they have an idea that doesn't fit into the business, that you're taking the time to help them understand why, and that you are taking what they're saying seriously, but level them up by going, hey, you're operating at this level right here. The decision we're making is at this level. I'd love for you to come to this next meeting, whatever, where we're going to talk about something that you don't really know is going on in the business. Is going to help you understand why we're making this decision, and it'll help you make better decisions that move the business forward. Instead, it's like, hey, you go do the tasks that we told you to do, have fun, right? And so that kind of brings into automation, because we could talk about this all day. So this brings us, I think, nicely into the automation piece, because you're probably, I'm not speaking to you, I'm just speaking to the audience. You probably have people on your team, or if you're a solopreneur on, just kicking off your business, you're probably doing a lot of admin tasks and a lot of busy work. There are workflows and automation, and there are use cases for AI that you can implement that are going to totally take that off your plate. And I think you could look at it one of two ways. Like, well, then I'm not going to have a job. But I think the better way to look at it is, how can you bring way more value in way less time and spend your time doing things you actually enjoy, or maybe get off in time to like go to your kid's baseball game. So I'd love for you to break down what is the biggest thing that you see holding people back from actually thinking about automating workflows?
It's fear. And it has several different masks, whether it's environmental impact of AI or security of using AI, or like you said, the majority is I'm going to be hastening my own demise of my career. But you said exactly the right thing, whether it's from the company's perspective or the user's perspective. Before you start automating a task, if you lay it out intentionally and you say, okay, I think I'm going to save about 10 hours a week here. Well, part of that discovery process is what am I going to do with that time? How am I going to level up, and how am I going to use that time, or how is this team going to use this time if we save 400 hours a month? What are we going to do to reallocate? Or if you're at a larger organization and you're going to have at least 20% turnover in a team on a given year, just statistically, and say you cut that down to 15, that's still 15% overturn. And I work with a lot of nonprofits, and my point to them is like, you're going to lose 3 admins every year out of this 15-person team. It happens. Like, you don't pay as much as anyone else. You can't, because of the funding, the way you get it. So instead of replacing those 3 people next year, let's hire one rock star fundraiser. What does that do to your organization? Or as those people decide that they don't want to do this anymore, can we upskill them to what they want to do because they joined your organization because of the mission?
Yeah.
So, excuse me. I think it's important when you're just doing discovery and finding out what to automate to also have in mind, what are we going to do with that time? If assuming we're successful, like what does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting because I guess the point is if you look at somebody's job description and their job description is 80 or 90% the things that you're going to automate, to your point, like I used to work at a company that was doing engineering software, and we dealt a lot with digital transformation and industry 4.0, which are huge buzzwords. But the point is, I was talking with a lot of people that drive massive, complete organizational change from the very top to the very bottom, and a lot of times it completely fails. But I talked to quite a few people at companies that everybody would have heard of, household name companies, that were successful at driving complete change in the organization. And almost every single person would say, look, it doesn't matter what leadership wants. You have to talk to the person on the shop floor, or, who's sitting at the desk, the lowest person on the totem pole, especially the ones who have been there for 50 years. You have to actually sit down with them and understand their job. And you have to understand what they want, and you have to understand what's driving them. And then you have to share the vision for how this change is going to help them in their life and their job. And if you can't do that, they're not actually going to use the system. And if they don't
Man.
use the system, the CEO doesn't get the data that they're looking for on, how to make better buying decisions across the globe. Because if the person in the logistics office isn't putting the right information in, they're not going to have that data. So you have to actually build it for everyone by actually going and learning from stakeholders. I'm saying all of that to say, like, if you have somebody whose job is going to be 90% automated, you need to sit down and really understand, where do you want to go in your career? Like, we are going to change some of these things. There are going to be changes, but we want those changes to be something that help you level up in your job, in your career. Or another example, and then I'd love for you to dive a little bit deeper into this, is with sales. Like, I've worked with sales teams a lot, and a lot of times it's hard to get salespeople to do anything. Like, and I understand why. They're based off of quota, like they're pure performance, right? So they don't want to do anything that isn't moving the needle for them, because they don't get paid otherwise, right? Or they're very tied to performance. So if you can't sit down with a salesperson and show them, hey, when you take this information and you put it into Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever they're using, it keeps us from being able to give you the right leads that are actually going to close. And so if you give us this information, we should be able to cut your meetings in half while still raising your pipeline, because we're going to be able to stop sending you bad quality opportunities. But if you don't put this in, you're going to end up doing a ton of busy work that's not actually going to increase your pipeline, right? And if you can't sit down and understand what the salesperson is looking for and build that process around them, they're not going to use it, and it's going to fail.
Absolutely. So when we're doing a project, and that's why discovery is so important and involving everybody throughout the entire internal value chain. Because if you do that blindly, as you said, like the C-suite just decides, hey, we're going to automate this and everybody can deal with it, or we're going to put this new software in and everyone just use it, period. And we'll shut off the other one in a year and a half. They never shut it off. They have concurrent softwares. I've seen it so many times. but once you do that, you've now lost the faith of everybody in the whole organization. They don't want to be a part of these projects. They don't want to raise up issues. Hey, we could automate this. We could automate this. If you do it just as you laid out and make them a part of the solution, a part of the process, and value their input, and don't lay them off, but reallocate those resources into high value activities, now they're looking for opportunities. And one of the best transformations there is for somebody is to turn them into your own internal digital transformation champion. If you've got somebody who's highly technical and abled, and you're going to remove enough hours that their capacity becomes free, you turn them into an internal me or you.
Yeah.
And now they are working across all departments looking for opportunities. And it's so transformational.
Yeah. And I'll say something kind of radical on this too, is a lot of the hard, high performers are overworking and burning themselves out. And I would say that most people who I've met a few exceptional people who are able to work like 12 hours a day, 6 or 7 days a week forever. And I have no idea how they do it. Most people can't do that. So, really people are working like 4 to 6 hours a day that's actually driving things forward. And then most of the rest of their day is busy work where their brain is already fried, especially if they're in a lot of meetings. And so the other use case for automating is just to give people time back so that they can actually recharge. Maybe
Yeah.
you can get them to the point where your team is actually working 4 to 6 very productive hours, knocking a couple things out and actually clocking out after 7 or 8 hours and going home
Yeah.
and getting refreshed, having way better quality of life, which then is going to turn back around to them having better, more innovative ideas and, them actually being able to be present when they're here because they're dealing with their home life. So I think that's another way to do it. Anyway, you could speak to that, but I'd love to kind of move towards, what's your secret for helping companies 10x without adding headcount?
I mean, it's all in the recipe and sharpening your axe. It's all very robust process discovery. So I use a combination of interviews, workshops, and task mining, which people may not be aware of. It's software that basically records every time you switch apps or switch browser tabs. I use software that doesn't have as many privacy concerns as your typical your employee management software. I don't do screenshots. I don't do stuff like that. But basically, I run that for usually a 30-day in a team, a 30-day window, and that between that and the interviews and the workshopping, we have a very, very deep understanding of the admin processes that are going on. So just to clarify, I'm focused on automating software related stuff. I am not a industrial automation expert or a robotics guy. It's all software related, but sometimes that touches physical processes. So really that's what it is. And through the process of workshops and interviews, I can also help steer the mindset towards what we're trying to accomplish and let those people tell me which way we should go when we are able to automate this. So everything is very, very structured in the way we do it. But it's heavily reliant on data, but it does not discount their experience.
Yeah, that's interesting because it kind of goes back to what we were saying with the digital transformation, where you're focusing a lot at the beginning on understanding people and how they're
Mhm.
operating and what they're doing, because you can't make something more efficient if it's not efficient to begin with.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And
yeah,
yeah, like making an SOP for the way Mark does something, and Mark goes on vacation, and Marcia does his job because Mark's on vacation. So she pretty much knows how to do his job. And she does it in a totally different way, takes 3 or 4 steps out and does it in 12 minutes, whereas he does it in 17 minutes. And you're like, all of a sudden, hey, Marcia's writing the SOP. This is how you do it now, Mark. Totally discounting the other things Mark does all day or what other processes his process touches. I've seen that 1,000 times. That's why really understanding like literally what they're doing on the keyboard and the way they think through their processes is just critical. You have to have both of them.
yeah. So, I think the tendency when we talk about automation or, creating efficiency using AI, is going to be the other piece that goes along with this is people often look at the surface thing that they can save time or energy with. But then, well, like we're saying, when you focus only on the surface thing, you might be automating or using AI for the thing and you're making something efficient that isn't, I guess this might be another way to say it. You're making something efficient that's not necessarily effective. And so if you
Yeah.
don't understand, like, what is the goal of this person's job to begin with? And, what are they doing that's actually moving the business forward? And then you're automating those processes. And if you don't do it that way, you're going to end up automating a ton of stuff into the business that, isn't actually as effective as it could be. So if you start out with the human element, you start out by mapping and understanding what we're actually trying to achieve, then you're way more effective in creating that automation. And I don't know exactly how you build out automation and how that works, but I've also seen a lot of automation stuff that gets very, very complicated and hard. It can be really hard to fix or edit or whatever down the road, and you have sunk costs in it. So if you don't take the time to really make sure you're building the right thing to begin with, you can end up building and building and building all these automations on top of automations that can really screw you over in the long run if you're not careful. I'd love for you to talk about uh, a time where you've um, had an automation that just made huge impact? Like, what's something where
Yeah. Oh
you
yeah.
were, yeah.
That's my favorite test case, and this is while I was still an employee at a Fortune 500 manufacturer here in the area, and we controlled the gate where all of the trucks with parts came in. And this is a massive plant, 7 buildings, huge. The biggest warehouse is the 6th largest continuous warehouse in the United States, and had 15 trailers within the compound at any given time, and 300 to 400 come in every day, overnight, at all times. And for many, many, many years, and it's been there a long time, the paperwork was a mess. Truck drivers were they were told by the guard where to go and where to park the trailer, which truck drivers park where they want to park based on whatever. And then they hand delivered paperwork for this load into the receiving office, which there were 40 or 50 different receiving offices among all these buildings. And the parts go to that particular dock or that particular building, and they're hand delivering them, and they're just putting it in an envelope next to the bay door that blows out. And so you had detention charges, you had lost paperwork, you had production issues, you had constant phone calls for people looking for bills of lading or saying this load never arrived. And it was, if you think of that, 400 trailers a day, and now you have trucking carriers calling because their equipment hasn't been unloaded, or they're like, yes, we delivered it. So the phone traffic and the inefficiency was insanity, honestly. And we built a pretty simple Power Automate flow where when the gate received the paperwork, they scanned it and they put the building and dock number on it. So the paperwork, you knew when the load arrived immediately. And this was before they had barcode scanning at the gate, because that's where most places are going for trailers if you're not into logistics. So we scanned the paperwork so that the receiving dock knew it arrived and had instant access to the paperwork at all times. So then the only issue becomes, did the truck driver drop it where they were told to? And that you have to build another process for. But this saved, God, I don't even remember how many hours it saved of just wasted phone calls, messages, calling trucking companies, downtime because you didn't have these parts. But it also saved a ton of detention charges, because if you hold on to a company's trailer for more than a couple of days, you start paying them daily because it's not emptied yet.
Dang, I love that. Yeah,
Yeah.
and maybe I don't want to spend too long on this because, but what were the basic things that you did to start resolving that problem? Like, what's step 1, 2, and 3?
Primarily, it was identify the issue. So it was literally go in with the truck driver through the gate and just every single step of the process, and then repeat that 4 or 5 times with different drivers, understanding. And of course, as I described it in hindsight, yeah, it's like, duh, this sounds insane, but you have to experience it to understand, because it's been going on for decades. So
Yeah.
that's the process it's been. For some reason, it worked at one point. So understanding the full process, and then inventorying all of our capabilities. Do we have the right people at the gate who can work a scanner? Do we have a scanner? Do we have access to the OneDrive and the Power Automate and all this stuff? Do they have access to it? So it's understanding what the current situation is, understanding what all of our capabilities and inventory are, and then crafting a solution, and then experimenting with the solution to ensure it works in tandem with the current solution. And then once we're confident it works, we flip the switch. And that's where the human in the loop comes in. If you've heard that term when it comes to automation, even if I automate 90% of your process, I'm going to assume only 60% of it actually automates correctly. And I need you to review and make sure that it's working correctly before we turn that flywheel a little more.
Yeah. And if you don't do that, you're going to screw yourself.
Yeah.
Really
If you just automate it and say, all right, you go do something else, like you just shot a fireball into your process.
Yeah. Man, I love that. I love that example. So somebody who's listening in this today and they're going, hey, I want to automate more in my business. I want to be more efficient. I want to work through this. What are 2 or 3 things that they should do tomorrow that are going to help them start working towards automating more of their admin work?
I'm going to presume they have a team. It's not just a solopreneur in this case. And the first thing I would do is have everybody start keeping a frustration log for 2 weeks at least, every day, just anything. It doesn't matter if they think it could be automated or not, because you don't know what that process touches in somewhere else. Have everyone keep a frustration log. This ticks me, I'm constantly redoing this email, this PDF, this stuff. I would also look for a task mining. There's a couple out there that are very affordable, like Taskmole. that basically just watches everything you do as you do it and gives you guidance on what could be automated. And I think it tied to Zapier or something like that. But it's really discovery, and also communicate with your team. Like, this is why we're doing this, not just keep a frustration log, but this is why we're doing this. Like, I understand that we're not hitting this benchmark, or this is the gap, or something that we want to accomplish. This is how we're going to do it. We're going to identify something that you could change. And some people do if you were a CEO for a day, what would you change? That's fine. I like to just a daily, because when you just ask people, if you were a CEO for a day, what would you change? It's different than every time something is not working well, they can write it down throughout 2 weeks. That's a little more organic, because people don't think about that when you ask them some creative thinking question.
Right.
And then from there, honestly, find the simplest thing. Find an easy win that you can automate. Don't overly. You said it yourself. The overcomplicated flows. These these innate inflows that we see on LinkedIn that have 1,000 nodes. Those do not work. They will not work. They'll break constantly.
Yeah.
Simple. Yes, I build complicated workflows that do a lot of stuff, but I modularize them per task, and so we know what breaks when something breaks. If you have 1 billion nodes in your automation, you don't know what broke.
Yeah.
And you'll have to hire a full-time employee just to triage your automation every day.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because I think some of my philosophy around how to build new services or work things in the market is actually very similar to what you're saying, and I've learned it by accident. So, like, back in the day, I built out this course. It was like a messaging course on how to identify who your ideal customer is and the problem, and then have unified messaging across your team. And the content itself was great. But what I did was I built out this course where I built a membership website. This was way before all this stuff is in a single platform. So I had to build a WordPress website. I had to build out the Membarium course content, adding in, all this other stuff. I had Infusionsoft and all these emails that went with each each module and everything. And it was awesome. It actually worked super, super, super well. And I made $300 from the course after 3 months of work. And so I built this whole system that wasn't really needed, I think would be the best way to say it. And so my process since then has evolved, but it really comes down to you listen before you sell before you build, and you build before you scale. And if you follow that, you can actually identify exactly who the right people are, identify that there's real market demand before you build something out. So you've actually sold it, and then you're building it to deliver the most simple, minimum viable solution that you possibly can. And then you do that 3, 4, 5 times and prove that there's demand beyond one person. Then you build out something that's more consistent. And then once you've done that 10, 15, 20 times and you've delivered it at a base level, now you talk about scaling through paid ads or, content marketing to get inbound and all that kind of stuff that everybody wants to start with, right? Everybody wants to scale.
Yeah.
And it's but what are you scaling?
Right.
Marketing services? You can't scale marketing services. You have to scale something very clear that there's a demand for, that's proven, that you've, walked through that process. And I think it's similar to what you're saying, where you're discovering, you're then proving that it's something that's actually worth creating a workflow around. And then you're building a minimum viable automation to actually solve that problem. And then once you've proven that, now you can really build something out that's more robust and then scale it into other systems while you're still making sure you're on the right track. And by taking that approach, you're just going to be way more effective at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's the old, what is it? Abraham Lincoln said, if I have 8 hours to cut down a tree, I'm going to spend 7 hours sharpening my axe. That still holds true.
Yeah, I love that. All right. So Jay, where can people find more about you if they want to 10x their business and, automate all this stuff and get you involved?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn. I mean, I'm kind of just a meme poster, and I kind of just take jabs at people who are kind of posting nonsense about AI. Or they can go to my website, 10xvelocity.ai, and hit me up. But I love running workshops for groups, especially nonprofits or public schools. But I work with anybody. And I'm not the one. I'm not bringing a product. I'm not bringing the magic. The magic is what you've got in your organization and your people. I just help unlock it.
Love it. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Jay. Really appreciate your time, and talk again soon. Thanks,
Yeah, man.
everybody,
Thanks
for
a lot.
watching.
It's fun.
All right. We'll see you guys next time.